Hello and welcome to our very first episode of our brand new Star Trek podcast, Long Range Sensors, the show where we choose an episode from the vast library of Star Trek to reminisce about and nerd over. Today on Long Range Sensors, we're picking up an episode in the far reaches of the Delta Quadrant, the Star Trek Voyager episode, Threshold. But that's still yet to come later on in the show, because right now, with this being our inaugural episode, we're going to stick to our short range sensors and give you an opportunity to get to know us a bit better. My name's Alastair McFly. As you might be able to tell, I'm British, but for the last 7 years, I've been living out on the east coast of Canada over in Nova Scotia. I stream regularly on Twitch, where you'll find me playing a bunch of games, including some old Star Trek classics. And I'm also writing an unofficial Getting Started guide for people who are new to Star Trek to help them navigate over 50 years of the final frontier. Joining me from all the way over in London, England, is my fellow co-host and good friend of over a decade. Some of you might recognize him as one of the hosts of Console Shock, the fantastic fortnightly podcast about modern and retro gaming chat. Ladies and gentlemen, and co-genitors, it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce to you the debonair, Mr. Trevor Whale.
Hello, Al.
Hello.
It's been a long time coming, isn't it? With for how many years we've talked about, doing some kind of a Trek-based chat that we record. Podcasts, as that's called.
Yeah, I want to say it was about 2009, 2010 is really when that started.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, when I think you put out a bit of our history on our various social stuff we've set up for this, so we don't want to sort of go crazy on that on this show. But yeah, obviously we knew fairly early on that we both like Star Trek, and we're chatting a lot about it, and we just felt that based on other people telling us that who heard us talk to each other about this stuff at work because we work together, that we should record it and put it out for other people to listen to because people would probably like it. Yeah, now we're finally doing it. Well, we've done it before, funnily enough, but this is probably the first real stab at it. Certainly for a Star Trek, something purely Star Trek focused, isn't it?
Yeah, we kind of did a very early sort of test, almost just testing the waters that we'd actually work well doing a podcast together. And for the test, we used Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah, I don't know what our full-on plan was ultimately to go with that, and we just literally. It was in my flat at the time, wasn't it? You came over and I just had like my MacBook Pro, I think. We just plonked it in front of us. I don't think we had any proper audio equipment.
We
just used the microphone. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've still got it, so maybe that's something we could throw out there when we really want to be embarrassed. But yeah, we just talked about it, didn't we? It was fun, but yeah, we kind of ended up going on to do other things, and we did end up doing other, online sort of video bloggy and audio bloggy stuff, but didn't quite sort of stick to the Star Trek formula. And it wasn't because we didn't want to do it or we thought our test failed. I don't know, it just didn't happen, did it? Really?
No, we had other focuses and things, but now we're kind of returning to our roots, and it's like now it's time. And I think the other thing is that Star Trek was reaching the end of its golden age in terms of popularity, and just shows were dwindling. Now it's on a bit more of a rebirth with CBS really pushing a lot of new Star Trek properties. So it's really an exciting time to get back into it, in all honesty.
Yeah, I guess when like sort of 2009, 2010, when we did that sort of pilot, I suppose, it was kind of we'd just come out of I would probably say we just come out of like a dark age, because the first JJ film had come out, but there wasn't any real hint of a new TV show. Obviously, that wouldn't happen until Discovery several years later. So we were probably just thinking the best we were going to get then is another film, and we did ultimately. And we actually went to see it together, didn't we? Into Darkness, like at midnight when it came out. We went crazy on that one. But yeah. I probably would consider it to be sort of the end of a dark age and the start of kind of a mediocre age. I don't mean that in the quality of what had available, the JJ stuff. I'm sure we'll touch upon that, sometime in the future on the show. But we certainly isn't where we are probably right now. Where maybe it's kind of, I don't know if it is a golden age, but maybe it's kind of a silver age because we've got a lot of shows on the go. It's not quite like it was in the 90s where every week there'd be a new episode for 9 months of the year, because the way TV shows are now kind of a finite set of episodes and not 26 really like clockwork like they
Mm.
used to be, right? And a movie every couple of years, which is absolutely, we just completely took that stuff for granted, didn't we? In those days, we're not we're as close as we ever have been to that kind of level, really. So yeah, it's a good time to sort of talk about Star Trek again now, I think.
Yeah, especially kind of looking back as to, not just how it is now, because obviously a lot of people are talking about how Star Trek is now, but
Yeah,
how it was when it first came out. Because when I certainly think back to my experiences of watching Star Trek: The Next Generation as a kid, and just the feeling of things, especially in the early seasons where the style was still slightly different to what appeared later on, and when it
yeah,
was all
yeah,
fresh and new, and when there hadn't been anything really quite like it, it was still a very different experience to what it is now. And
yeah.
it's kind of an experience you can't really recapture in a way, not in a bad way, because obviously there's been great things since, but it was a unique point in time.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, we were sort of looking at our history about it. Obviously, we were young kids when the next generation started, and not just that, but being in the UK, we have a very different experience to what perhaps our fellow sort of Trek YouTubers that are American would have, where
Mm,
like Star Trek: The Next Generation for them started on that precise date in September in 1987. But for us, unless you knew someone, obviously I would have been I was like a 4-year-old kid on that exact date that it started. Um, and I didn't really start watching Star Trek until my first memories of it are my dad watching the reruns of the original series on
okay.
BBC Two. So that was around, yeah, 1988, 89, and looking at sort of Memory Alpha and a website we're probably going to talk about a lot. It's an awesome, the best like Trek website ever, apart from ours. Is Yeah, looking at when they reran it, there was actually I saw there was a rerun in the late 80s. So that would have been when I saw it for the first time ever. I
Mm,
think my dad was just watching it for his own benefit because he was a Trekkie from back when it started on the BBC Two originally in 1969, I think. So he's totally OG sort of Trekkie, and he was rewatching it, in the late 80s. Obviously, Trek was back, in everybody's consciousness because the
mm,
movies had been doing well, the original series movies, and I think there was obviously there was a next generation. If you picked up in those days, you'd have to have picked up the movie magazines and Starlog, which we did get over in the UK.
mm,
Starlog magazine and things like that. Empire magazine, even though that's mainly films, it would do TV show bits as well. You would see that there was a new Star Trek show in that. Um, so it was ramping up like massively. But I remember obviously watching Star Trek when this is about 5 years old and liking it.
mm.
And then it was really in bits and pieces we would get it really. Like I remember like the facts are that it started on RTV in September 1990, which is crazy, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
Al, where was it at in the US at that point?
I mean, they would have been just starting season three, really.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, and for me, I kind of, I do think back and I wonder, would I have been as into it if I'd seen it in '87 when I was so young? I think having that extra 2 years to reach an age where I could fully appreciate it, I think I enjoyed it a lot more.
Yeah.
I still would have been blown away by it, but I think I was able to appreciate it and understand it at a much better level. Certainly for next generation.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I again got it in like bits and pieces because I'd already seen so I was already probably I would say an actual proper fan by like about 1989. And obviously we still hadn't had Next Generation on TV in the UK then. Again, you would need to know someone in the US to have taped it for you and shipped it over to you, which I'm sure people did, but we certainly didn't. And my experience of Trek was the reruns of the original, and probably more the movies than anything. Actually, funnily enough, my dad,
Hmm.
we had one. He had for some reason he just had Star Trek 3 on VHS. That was the only one he made a point of buying. I mean, VHS sets weren't cheap, in for inflation, like a
Oh God, no.
movie. were probably about 30 quid now, probably. It was like
Mm.
11.99 or something, wasn't it? In Woolworths or wherever you went to buy your videos. But that was probably about 30 quid now. So it's not something you could always just casually buy, you know. But he had one. We had Star Trek 3, and that was the first Star Trek film I watched, which is kind of odd because obviously you'd think it'd be difficult to enjoy it because you kind of need to watch two because it goes directly onto it. But I watched it on VHS, and I absolutely watched the crap out of it. I watched it and rewatched it and rewatched it. I loved it. I don't know what it was. I just loved it. And it's still a great Star Trek film to this day. I mean, I'm not going to review it. We'll get to an episode where we will, I'm sure. But yeah,
that must have been weird though, kind of growing up, and it's like spoilers. So Spock's dead, and you'd be like, but who's Spock?
Yeah, I think because I having seen like catching bits of the reruns, I knew there was a Spock person and a Captain Kirk, and they were on an Enterprise, so I knew all that. And then I got
that would make sense.
Yeah, so the pieces were there, and I kind of knew what they were. And so my dad had this one VHS tape of Star Trek 3. I remember like the cover had the poster art, something which Blu-rays don't do, which really annoys me about the Blu-ray release. They put this a very cool looking, you know, it's like the Star Trek arrowhead with like, you know, the text, and then cool like publicity photos of the crew photoshopped in. It's not. I just want the poster. Just give me the poster. But anyway, that's a different rant. But yeah, it had the poster artwork, and it had that CIC video like purple and black, like band stripy like stuff going on in the background of the video case.
I recall the one.
Yeah, and I think each film had different coloured stripes. I think Star Trek, it was like purple, and like Wrath of Khan was like gold or something. But yeah, watched the hell out of that. And I remember around that time, like, you know, 89, 90, 91, whenever the other films were on TV, I would get my dad to tape them for me. So I'd be like, oh, Star Trek 4's on TV, cool. 1's on TV, cool. I remember it took ages for me to see 2, though, for some reason. I really don't know why. And what's even weirder, like, if my dad, like didn't tape it or something, because we didn't have a tape that was free, I would actually do an audio recording of it. I would get a portable cassette player, one of those ones like you'd plug into a Commodore 64, those big chunky ones with a big speaker on, sit it next to the TV speaker and actually record the audio of whatever Star Trek movie was on TV. And I would listen to it. So it was the closest I could get. But eventually I would get, you know, the VHS, I would get them recorded off the TV. So I'd gradually start to build up, you know, what I'd seen. And in terms of the Next Generation, it was just weird little nuggets of stuff that I would see. So again, we're looking at sort of 88, 89, 90 sort of time. I remember seeing the first sort of toys in Toys R Us and wondering, what's this like Star Trek Next Generation thing? I don't mean the Playmates toys we got in the mid-90s. I mean, around 88, 89, there was like Galoob, I think, made a bunch of Star Trek Next Generation
toys.
They
did, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember those?
Yeah, they were... because they were kind of had the license just before Playmates kind of picked it up and went with it. But Galoob were kind of the first ones to properly successfully do some Star Trek license stuff, and then Playmates just kind of expanded on that and did even better.
Yeah, I remember seeing those in like I was growing up in Leicester in those days. That's where I'm from originally. And I remember there was a big Toys R Us in Leicester, and I would go there to look at Transformers. But I remember like knowing that, you know, knowing I liked Star Trek, and there was these Star Trek cool, weird looking toys of Next Generation. And I think I did vaguely know there was a new show called Next Generation. But I remember seeing these very small. They're only about sort of original Star Wars, those sort of, you know, original Star Wars toys, Kenner toys. They're about the same height as them. And there was like a die-cast Enterprise D. It was a bit crap, but it was pretty cool then because there wasn't really anything else you could get a toy of, Star Trek-wise, like ship-wise. There was that. And there was also like, probably the thing I remember the most was the DC comic series. Because in those days, and it's not really the case now in the UK, but you just like news agents would have a selection of American comics. We had our own comics, like Beano Dandy, Judge Dredd, 2000 AD, all that kind of stuff, as well as Marvel UK made a Transformers comic, and I used to get that like crazy. G.I. Joe, where the Action Force over here.
We even had Sonic the comic, which had its own origin story for Sonic the Hedgehog, which actually is still to this day the best origin story for Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, that's right. I used to get that as well. Sonic the comics is very cool. But yeah, we had our own comics, but they'd have a selection of American comics like Marvel and DC. And I remember seeing like I think I picked it up when I saw it. Like I've still got it. Issue 2 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I think was dated like October like '89. And I remember seeing that comic, and I think around the same time my dad got the first release of Encounter at Farpoint on VHS. So I finally got to see the show that all this random stuff, marketing stuff that we got before the show was shown regularly in the UK. I was able to see it because I guess they figured, well, they're getting the videotape, so we can just release the toys and comics and everything.
Mm.
I remember watching it, and I kind of thought it was a bit crap. I don't think I enjoyed it that much. Didn't like Captain Picard. The story wasn't that good. It was quite boring. But I still watched the hell out of it because, again, you had a limited amount of like VHS tapes, and you're a little kid. You can't go and buy them. You're not an adult. You have to get what your parents get. Luckily, my dad was a Trekkie, and also the fact that my dad worked in a video shop. He worked in HMV in Leicester, in Oxford Street. He was the resident DJ on the in-store radio station, which is kind of a crazy story in itself. My dad was the DJ, so when they played music and and everything in the store, he was the guy doing who would talk in between the songs and do it. And it was like a real radio station that HMV used to have. But the great thing about that was he would get first dibs on VHS tapes and stuff that they would be selling, and also even rental copies of stuff he would get hold of. But yeah, so we got like Encounter at Farpoint. I think this is when it was released in '89. And yeah, we watched it. I think my dad watched it. I don't really know what he thought of it, but I watched it loads, over and over and over again. And that was about the only episode that I had for until BBC started showing it. So I didn't see the second episode, the Naked Now, until BBC showed it. So there was a year probably between me seeing the pilot and seeing the Naked Now. So weirdly, I was quite well warmed up to the Next Generation by the time BBC was showing it. And I remember being very confused with the DC comics because there'd be this dude that kind of looks like Riker but has a beard in the comic, and I didn't know, that later on when it got to the second season that he would grow a beard, and then obviously eventually I saw the second season probably again on when BBC Two was showing it. I was like, oh right, that was Riker. So I think I kind of would skim through the comics and not really pay attention to the characters' names, So yeah, so it was weirdly seeing the comic in literally '89, the DC comic, and one episode of the first episode, and random toys and stuff. I mean, is that anything like what you remember with how that sort of stuff started for us?
So interesting. I didn't start until it aired on BBC. My father was also the one who introduced me to Star Trek, but he was not a Trekkie.
Oh, that's interesting.
He wasn't even into Star Trek. All it was I recall playing in the living room with some toy Matchbox cars, just playing with those on the rug. And my father was just sat on the sofa with his newspaper, and he's kind of looking and going, "Oh, there's a TV show coming up that you might like, Alastair. It's about spaceships," and he switched over to it. Yeah,
it really was about spaceships.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I mean, obviously, Star Trek was still in the public consciousness in terms of like he'd know about it, and he knew me enough to know that I would be interested in it, even though it's not really his thing. And I just remember being completely transfixed. Yes, the plot may have been dull, but for me, I was just blown away by the sets, by the ship, by the effects. Like I just remember kind of my jaw basically being open the entire time watching it and just going, this is the best thing I've ever seen. I mean, it completely beat everything else that I've been watching up until that point. I mean, for me, space was kind of like Super Ted with Spotty and the rocket and stuff like that. We didn't, and I wasn't
and if
really...
you maybe caught the original series, if you caught it randomly on a BBC repeat, and nothing like Next Generation would. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that I did like watching things like Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica, but I don't know if I saw them before or after Star Trek. I think I saw Land of the Giants before I saw Star Trek.
I remember Land of the Giants and Time Tunnel as well. Weirdly,
Yes.
shows that were sort of, alongside the original Star Trek that came out. Yeah. So my dad was into those.
Yeah. Sci-fi always felt like it was always old shows. Star Trek was like the first proper, this is current and brand new. And I think that's why I was so blown away by it, because it just looks so much better than anything else that I'd ever seen on TV.
I don't think there was any sci-fi on TV really. Even
No.
when people think the 80s is quite a progressive, when lots of cool shows are on, like advanced sort of shows, but there was no science fiction at all. Right? Star Trek didn't start off everyone going nuts to making sci-fi. In the 80s, there was absolutely nothing, and the idea of being like a sequel to another series was even more unusual. Now it happens all the time. You got like Walking Dead as a spin-off, and like Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, had spin-offs, and Stargate SG-1. That was really unusual. The only show that I remember that did that, even in like going into the 90s, was I remember there was this Western show called Bonanza that was quite famous in the 60s and 70s. And I'm not into Westerns, I've never watched it, but I remember in the 90s, they made Bonanza the Next Generation. I remember, God, they've literally ripped off like the Star Trek idea of having something called the Next Generation. And that was literally a thing. And that was the only other example I could think of. And like I say, now it's very common. But yeah, nothing looked anything like it on TV. And I remember I remember like literally being sat by, I think, yeah, this is a weird like single memory that I remember of, I think, getting ready for school one morning in like the summer of 1990. So I think I was still living in Leicester at this point, and eating my breakfast, I think, getting ready for school. And I remember the advert on BBC Two came on saying advertising the Next Generation is going to be starting next week or something, or in 2 weeks' time. I don't know how long ahead they often put this stuff, these teasers. But I remember thinking consciously, oh, well, I've seen the first episode, so I'll skip that, and I'll just wait for the second episode. And he got to the second episode, and I remember remember how amazing it kind of was to see the same people that I've watched to death on this one VHS tape of the first episode that I'd watched doing other things, like seeing like going on another ship, like 'cause they obviously do that on that second episode, and all the funny the episode's kind of silly, isn't it, when you think about it? But I remember being like, wow, this is like overload. They're doing other stuff. It's not just Q and like the saucer separating and like the weird like glowing crap at the end with the tentacles. It was different stuff, and you know what? I can't remember even then. Again, this is obviously 1991 going into 1990, going into 91, 92. I don't particularly remember sitting down and making a point of watching every, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday evening. I think it was on. But I think I watched it semi regularly. So because it's weird. So the reason I think that is because when I started watching it hardcore, like real hardcore, like I'm gonna effing watch the hell out of this now. That was when my parents got Sky in 1994, and
you lucky blighter!
It was absolute Star Trek heaven at that point. Because Next Generation was on every day. I couldn't. It blew my mind. I was like, it was on every day on Sky One at 5. I could watch friggin' whole seasons in a matter of weeks. And it hadn't finished its run by that point. It was still being shown as new episodes on Sky One on Sunday evenings, Monday evenings.
And this was the annoying thing, because I had just the terrestrial 4 channels. I didn't have satellite, so I was definitely that person who would always tune in every Wednesday for Next Generation, and it ran as far as Best of Both Worlds.
Yes,
and then it stopped.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and it went off the air after that. And I remember it being such a long wait, because that's when Sky One got the first one rights. And they got first one rights for DS9 and for Voyager. And so it was this really sort of annoying thing. Where, I mean, that's to be honest, though, that's when I found out more about the original series, because they started doing reruns of the original series whilst they were waiting to get Next Generation back. So that's when I was introduced to that. But as time went on, you'd have magazines that would report all this new stuff that was going to be coming down the pipeline, because it was already coming out over there and we were having to wait. and then I'd have to wait even longer, or I'd have to buy the VHS as the only way to stay on touch.
Yeah, because
stay on top even.
The VHS tapes weren't massively delayed from. I mean, I think obviously there was about a year and a bit before we got our first one in 1989. But after that, there was a constant like every other week or something. They released you'd get 2 episodes on a tape, which is probably for like any like Zoomers that are listening. That's kind of mind blowing. Probably that you'd have to pay like 15 quid for 2 episodes. But yeah, that's what you did. There was 2 episodes that would come out. I think it was literally on a constant flow in the UK, like every 2 weeks. So I don't think there was any, unless you remember, like a video club or something. I don't know if there's any subscription thing. I know in later years there was.
Yeah. I don't know if there was for Next Generation. I definitely did for DS9 and Voyager.
I do remember those being available then. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember signing up, and they sent me I was trying to sign up from a certain video, and they sent me the one before it, which I already owned. Having to contact them, going, can I have the other one that's out? That's the one I want. I don't want this one. I've already got it.
Yeah, that was interesting. So yeah, you'd have to wait. Like there'd be new like 2 episodes every couple of weeks. So I think at one point we were only about a few months behind America showing them first. So if you had, if you were, obviously we were kids, we didn't have money to buy these things. And my parents weren't interested in doing it for us either, unfortunately. But yeah, even though my dad was a Trekkie, I don't think, money went on other things, and he didn't want to get a huge collection of those VHS tapes. And to be honest, it was more me that would get them when I got older and I had my own money. And I was still living with my parents. But yeah, the VHS tapes weren't that far behind. But TV wise, I seem to remember it as, I think this is wrong actually from what I've read subsequently. I seem to remember it as we hit 1992 and they showed Best of Both Worlds Part 1. So literally up to, Mr. War, Fire, and then cutting to be continued. And that was it. And then they said, we're no longer showing Next Generation. Next week is the original series. I seem to remember that happening and being really pissed off. I
remember having to wait a while.
Being like, my jaw dropped at the end of that episode. Yeah, I wasn't getting any magazines at that point that had the, this is what happens in the next episode. Kind of glad that I didn't actually, because it would have ruined it. Like Starlog would have completely ruined Trek for me if I got it every month. But to be honest, in those days I was buying video game magazines. I wasn't really buying TV magazines, like Empire magazine or Cine Fantastique or any of those ones that would cover Trek. There wasn't a Star Trek Monthly then either. Obviously, that's a magazine that's been going for years now, but that hadn't started yet. That wouldn't start till a few years later, and I would get it then when it started. But yeah, and then it turns out, like you say, apparently they did show Part 2 on BBC Two, but I don't remember that. But
I did see it. I definitely saw them do Part 2, which from what I've read was like May.
Yeah. From maybe I saw Part 2 and I was just pissed off that they were showing the original series, but it was fine. So it ended up loving the original series because I watched the absolute crap out of that.
Yeah,
when that came on. But yeah, and yeah, it was Sky. It was because of Sky, wasn't it? They got the rights. But you had to have Sky, so I'm guessing you didn't have it at that point.
No, I never ended up with Sky. I was terrestrial the entire time, and then it wasn't until like yourself, it's just as you get older, you were able to start affording VHS tapes, and my God, I had a lot of them, which my mother found recently. She's got them, and she was kind of like, do you want these and stuff? I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford. Well, the problem's we've got multiple problems here. One, shipping them to Canada is going to cost an arm and a leg, and then there's nothing that will play them.
Yeah,
and they're not worth enough to even sell. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so it's like either recycle, find a charity shop, and just donate them. I just there's not really much value to the old VHSs. Not when you've got all the HD remasters for Next Generation available on streaming sites. There's just no collectability to the VHS anymore.
No, I mean, go on, El. Sorry.
But one thing I will say is that I've been to a few shops here in Canada,
Yeah.
but we'll, thrift shops and things like that, and found their VHS tapes,
Right. Yeah.
and the artwork is terrible. It
Oh,
looked
really?
really
Yeah.
bland. There's nothing to it. The covers that we had in the UK just looked so much more interesting. The ones in North America, it was just basically the same promo shot for the cast. That just didn't seem to be, and it was like a grey box as opposed to
Yeah.
black.
Yeah. The funny thing is about the UK ones, I actually thought they were kind of a bit lame because the Next Generation and Star Trek ones, the Star Trek ones, are original series ones, which they started releasing them on VHS around the same time as TNG. The Star Trek original series, I remember them being just basically the Star Trek font, with the Star Trek logo, and just like a still from the episode in front of like a transporter room. It looked okay. It was fine, but nothing. I was like, oh my god, so cool, like movie poster art. I remember Next Generation being like a cast shot. And I used to think that cast shot was so funny because they would keep the exact same cast shot. I think it's a painting someone painted for the video.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
it was like Picard at the front. They used it a lot, didn't they, in other marketing as well? But as the years
Riker
went
to
by,
the left and stuff. Yeah,
right to the left. And as the years went by, they just like airbrushed it and just added more junk onto them to make them look more like they did in that particular season. Like the next season, they'd paint a beard on, but they didn't really change Riker much. So he still looked like babyface Riker with a bad like beard. Nothing like what he would look like. And they had to sort of put Pulaski in and then take her out again and put Crusher, but she had different haircuts, so that to sort of mess with the haircuts. And it was again the same image, but just with like people photoshopping like the crap out of it, or just painting over it, probably in those days. But yeah, I don't. My family didn't really go berserk getting the videos, and probably by the time we got Sky, it didn't really seem necessary because, yeah, like I said, it was an absolute Star Trek wonderland. When we got Sky One, I mean, Sky generally was cool. I mean, just for people that don't know, Sky was like cable TV in America. It was like a ton of extra channels on top of the 4 regular ones that everybody got. You had to pay for it, of course.
and it had Simpsons.
Had the Simpsons.
It had brand new Simpsons. I mean, BBC got Simpsons, the later one as well. But, again, Sky just managed to bag all the first run rights to all the cool stuff.
Yeah, it was basically, they marketed Sky in those days on FA Premier League football, Star Trek, and The Simpsons. They were the 3 things that are used. And yeah, when Mum and Dad got it, it was great because Next Gen was on every day at 5. There was like a kids like program called the DJ Cat Show on before that. Hopefully, people in the UK listening probably remember that. They had Sky One, the DJ Cat Show, and then straight after that, Next Generation every day from 5 till 6. And then there was a show called Games World from 6 till half 6, which was literally a video games show every day. So obviously we had Games Master, which was once a week. Actually, around the time Star Trek was on TV, actually on a Wednesday evening. Remember, I had to record Star Trek and I'd watch that. Then I'd watch Games Master live. That was kind of the ritual I remember as a kid. But anyway, so there was Games World, and then The Simpsons from 7 till 8. So you'd have that was 3 hours. You could just literally plant yourself in front of the telly and just watch the hell out of it. And so that was the first time I watched the entire run of Next Generation. So there was tons of episodes that I didn't know about that I first saw the first time on Sky. And yeah, it was just like, this is freaking amazing. I loved it.
One thing that's confused me is that I'd seen most of TNG, if not all. Well, I mean, there would have been a few episodes I hadn't seen. Plus, there's episodes that we had that were cancelled.
Yes.
Because like the High Ground, which had stuff which is actually getting pretty accurate now. They had a line about the reunification of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to take place in 3 years from now?
I don't know if they're actually doing. Are they doing a full-on reunification? I'm not sure they are,
but I mean, it's one of those things that back then there was a whole load of terrorism going on at the time.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That kind of
stuff.
Yeah, well, it also suggested that terrorism can be successful. So the BBC were like, nope, we're not showing that. Ireland were like, nope, we're not showing that.
Yeah.
So we didn't get to see some episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of them, like Conspiracy and the Icarus Factor, they were cut for violence and stuff. But I remember seeing most of it, and I'm pretty sure, like, I mean, memories can be warped, but I am pretty sure that I saw the series finale, All Good Things, long before we saw Star Trek Generation in cinemas. But from what I've seen, the BBC didn't finish airing Next Generation until 1996. But
Yeah,
that movie
you're
came out in
right.
94.
Kind of
And
bizarre, isn't it? If you weren't keeping
yeah,
up in any other way.
so
Yeah,
I must have been getting the TNG videos. I must have been getting a lot of those around that time because that's the only way that I will have seen the finale. Because I remember being really excited about seeing Star Trek Generations because the show had ended, for me at least. The show had ended, and it's like, this is the next thing. Obviously, it was in magazines and everything. I think they were the first movie to actually have a website as well, if I recall.
yeah, I think it was. I think you could still go on it as well. I think it's still
I
live.
don't think it's there anymore. Space Jam certainly is.
Archive.org. Yeah, yeah, Space
Uh,
Jam. Yeah.
maybe with Archive that would probably be the only way. But I remember that I was so excited to see it. My father arranged for friends of his whom I'd maybe met once before, maybe twice. They went to the cinema and took me with them just so that I could see it in the cinema.
Oh, cool.
Which was neat. But yeah, it's weird because when I think back, and it's harder when you've seen so many episodes so many times over and over. But yeah, I find it bizarre to think that it was still running for another 2 years on BBC after the movie Generations, and
Yeah,
that would have run it up straight until First Contact.
yeah, that is interesting. I mean, by that point, obviously, I'd already had Sky for a couple of years, so I was, it was a lot easier for me to stay up to date. I do remember. So we got like Sky in sort of late '94. So TNG had finished in the States, but I do remember catching literally the last 3 or 4 next gen episodes. So like Preemptive Strike and like Emergence and then all
Mm.
good things. Might have been more than that, but I think it probably was just those last sort of 3 or 4. I remember catching those on their premiere on UK TV, which is on Sky One. And again, I think this was like on a Sunday evening, like 8 o'clock or something. It was either a Sunday evening or a Monday evening. I can't remember, but it was like 8 o'clock. It wasn't like any earlier than that. But I do remember when it got to the last episode and they were showing that on Sky. That was a big deal for me personally, and for like my family actually. I think we all made a point of watching it together live on Sky when it first got shown. And I remember being kind of quite emotional at the end of it because it is a really beautiful end to the series.
Mm.
And yeah, I remember so I was like 11 years old, I think, and with TNG had been a thing in my life for, well, yes, it's like '89 really in terms of it being a thing that I knew about and watched. So yeah, it was literally something I'd grown up with, and seeing it for the first time, I think I taped it so I could watch it again, loads of times. But yeah, yeah, I remember remember watching that last episode, All Good Things, when it was first shown. But it wasn't, obviously it was bittersweet because Deep Space Nine was on as well at that point, and I hadn't really watched a lot of that. It's funny because I watched Red Letter Media, YouTubers that I really
Mm.
like. I think Al, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
Yeah, I love the Mr. Plinkett reviews of the Star Trek
yeah,
movies,
yeah,
especially.
Mr.
Yeah.
Plinkett. Yeah. But there's this great episode where Mike talks about what it was like seeing Deep Space Nine for the first time. And he was like, yeah, so I kind of watched it and I caught I can't remember if I watched that entire first episode, but it was kind of weird because everybody was really grumpy and angry and everything was dirty and people were shouting at each other. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I like this. And there was a bit when every time Picard was on or a Next Generation bit was on, I was like, oh, cool, this is a bit I can enjoy. And then there was a bit when the Enterprise actually leaves. It sort of moves away from the docking pylon and goes. And Mike was like, oh, I was watching. I was like, oh, don't go, don't leave me, don't leave me with all these weirdos. I want to stay with you guys. take me with you. And I think that was kind of how I felt, And then obviously, to be honest, I think it was like when they started showing it on BBC Two around 95, 96, that I started watching Deep Space Nine, thinking, oh, this is actually kind of good.
Mm.
It took a while for me to get into it, and yeah, then I went nuts on it when it started becoming more readily shown. You could watch it every single day. 'Cause they would do that with the other series on Sky One. They would get through a run of Next Gen at 5 every weekday. Then they'd go on to Deep Space Nine. And there was enough episodes, released because not the whole series hadn't been done then. They would go on to that, and then later on Voyager, and so forth. I don't think they do it anymore. I don't think they have the rights to a lot of this stuff these days. I don't even know. But yeah, and yeah, I remember watching that last episode, and I think my dad would pick up sporadically odd little episodes on VHS. I remember he got the Spock unification episode.
Mm,
I remember he got that, but he got it like a big rental. Like, remember, like VHS tapes in the UK, the rental versions are in bigger boxes than the
yeah.
regular sort of sell through, I think is the term they use.
Uh,
The ones just
it,
buying the shop.
there was a place that where I lived, there was two video rental stores. One of them
Yeah,
had the really big, chunky plastic boxes, and the other
yeah,
one
yeah,
just had regular cassette boxes,
yes,
which was really weird. But the regular one was the one that I went to, so it was always kind of weird going to the other video store. It's like, why did they have these really cheap? Because they felt cheap. They felt like they would crack a lot easier,
yeah. That's right. And the artwork
which
was
is
never
probably
as
why they
good.
were there for the rental.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, we were sort of talking about the artwork.
Oh
It was always the art
yeah,
was always better on those larger ones.
well right, because when I went to the rental store that I would always go to, you got the original artwork. When you went to
Yes,
the other video store, which was just a little bit further walk away, which is why I didn't really go there, they just had a generic. It was a larger, thicker box, but it was brown, and it just had the company's name on it.
oh right, right.
So you take the video home, like the movie or the TV show, and you
Yeah,
never got the artwork. You never got the blurb on the back. You didn't get to enjoy that part of it, which is also another reason why I loved going to this other place, which was smaller. It had fewer titles, but yeah, it was always just a better rental experience.
I remember one example really pissed me off was when I remember being super excited about Star Trek 6 coming out, available to rent. Because
Oh god, there were so many trailers for that as well.
yeah,
Like I
there
used
were,
to see that on TV a lot for it.
yeah, I remember my dad got. I kind of mentioned it briefly already, then we trailed off a bit, but the unification part 1 and 2. My dad got that
Mm.
as a separate feature length
Yeah, I was going to
rental
ask you if that
size
was the
box.
feature. Yeah, I was going to ask
Yeah,
if it was the feature length version because initially when it was released, it was in two parts, but then
yes,
they did do a set of just the TV movies. So you would
yes,
have
that's
like
right.
Best of Both Worlds and Unification and all those all as that like fully uncut, like seamless
Yeah, it was like one
versions.
feature length. Yeah, basically he
So much
got that.
better. Yeah.
As I say, my dad worked, with the biggest video, selling place in the UK, HMV. So he had contacts that would get him rental copies of stuff, and he managed to grab that. And I think we saw in like the various media, like entertainment, like sort of stuff that we get bits of in the UK that there was Spock is going to appear in Next Generation. It was like, oh my god, I think like stuff like that would be in the papers.
Mm.
I remember like reading in like the Daily Mirror or something that in the next Star Trek film, Kirk is dying, and being like, "Oh my god!" And I read that in the paper. Weirdly enough, it was that big of an important thing for the general public. But
Mm.
yeah, we got that video, the Unification Part 1 and 2, and it had the trailer for Star Trek 6. I think I knew already there was a Star Trek 6 coming out because I'd get the odd magazine and movie magazines would have whatever new films coming out. Star Trek was obviously going to be mentioned, and on TV as well. They'd be like, "What new films are coming out?" Show or something would be on. Um, and I remember seeing the trailer, and I was too young to go and see it. It was 91, I think, that came out. I was already into Star Trek, so I wanted to see it. But it came out the following year, because obviously in those days it took like a year for a film to come out to rent, let alone
Mm.
buy. And I remember renting it, and you got a really nice box that had like the poster artwork. And then I remember like the bit that pissed me off was like when it became available to buy separately, they used like the alternate poster, which is just like a weird face, Klingon forehead with the Enterprise sort of warping past it, and it looked kind of
That was
crap.
always
Yeah,
the like the go-to one for me because that's the one that I
yeah,
recall seeing on that VHS.
yes, that's right. That was the one that was on the regular one you would just buy in the shop since forever, I think.
Hmm.
But the one that was on the rental one was the other poster, which was like a cool sort of shaft of like beaming like energy with the three
Isn't that
faces
like
of like
yeah? I was gonna say they're kind of stacked one on top of the other, aren't they?
yes,
With I think is it a Warbird? heading to it or something like that.
Yeah, like a bird of prey, like flying into
Yeah,
it, shooting. The Enterprise is getting like is there as well.
yeah.
It looks cool as hell, like an awesome poster. That was on the rental copy, so I was kind of annoyed that I was like, why are they using quite crap sort of on it? But then like the artwork got a lot better because, like I said, Next Generation would be kind of that sort of generic picture of the crew with a little still from the episode that's on the tape or episodes. And then when we got to Deep Space Nine and Voyager, you got this really beautiful hand painted. It probably did have some like digital stuff done to it in that point, but pretty much hand painted. Like I think the Deep Space Nine VHS had like the wormhole with a bit of Deep
Hmm.
Space Nine come out of it, and it would have like either a face of a character that's the main focus of the episode, or like several little faces, and it just looked beautiful. And then Voyager would have like an awesome sort of shot of the Voyager itself doing whatever it did in that episode. Like I
Hmm.
remember like the
You'd
first
have like a
episode.
Yeah, you'd have like a
Yeah,
picture of a planet, or you would have like a
yeah,
Borg sphere, and sometimes you would have like a semi-transparent version of one of the characters' faces. You
yes,
know,
exactly, yeah.
that would still be superimposed in there somewhere. But yeah, DS9 and Voyager definitely had the better artwork of all the Star Trek shows released on VHS. Though talking about trailers, there was a trailer that I remember
Yeah,
on the Voyager and DS9 tapes, and it was
yeah.
advertising Voyager. And this is
Oh,
one of those
right.
things where it's almost kind of like, okay, you might be able to excuse it if it was like a TV commercial, but these were commercials, these were trailers on official Star Trek VHSs. And so there's this one episode, and it's talking about Tuvok and Chakotay, and I can't recall which episode it is, but the voiceover names them as Tuvok and Chakatai.
Oh my god. They didn't look
Just
this stuff up before
completely,
they recorded it.
yeah, completely butchers the pronunciation, and nobody at any point went back to them and said, that's not how you pronounce it.
The names are
There
probably
was
in the
no
footage of
quality control.
the characters probably speak the names as well in the trailer. You know?
Yeah, and the thing
Yeah.
is, this is like we're talking like the later seasons, like season 5 or 6. So it's
Yeah,
not
so
like
we're
this was
nearly
like
hitting
just for this first season. The
yeah,
show was established.
yeah, and we're hitting like the 2000s nearly by that point, so stuff is pretty, well oiled and they know, well, you would think they know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, but yeah, there you go, Tuvok and Chakatai.
Oh god.
It's always stuck with me for some reason. It's always stuck with me, but it was it was terrible. I didn't know how to process that when I was younger.
When I started getting older, yeah, obviously Voyager started on Sky. I remember watching the early sort of seasons of that, and now I would watch, when there was a new episode coming on Sky, and I really enjoyed it. Deep Space Nine, I kind of got into later, and I think by the time it was weird, because I remember, like, as I say, sort of 95, 96 is when I started watching Deep Space Nine because of BBC Two. So I think
Hmm.
it was around the second season. I think I actually started watching it, and then I got the pilot Emissary on VHS. I actually bought it. I think for I had some money, I think pocket money or something, and I bought it in like a video shop that had like a wall, literally an entire wall of Star Trek. Because by that time we were hitting like 4 TV series and 6 films,
Hmm.
so you could like that much had been released by that point. I was just like, I would drool over that wall. I'd be like, it would cost you thousands of pounds to buy all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, and I got to pick out one piddly sort of video from this video ward of like, I want that one, and I got that episode, and I remember watching the first episode. So then I was kind of like, right, now I get it. I've got the whole context, and then I got into it, and then simultaneously season 4 was starting on Sky, and obviously, we know how awesome like season 4 of Deep Space Nine is. Worf coming on and Cisco. Again, a lot of the best Star Trek stuff is related to some kind of facial or head-based hair thing going on. And obviously
Hmm.
Cisco got shaved his head and grew a goatee and became like a complete like beefcake at that point. So yeah, I was just like watching like the hell out of it. So I was kind of watching season 2 and 4 simultaneously in a weird kind of way. But it worked. And Yeah, it was just, I think, around that time I started getting Star Trek Monthly. So that was probably the first time, aside from the occasional issue of Starlog, which like you were saying, like if you read something like Starlog, you would obviously that would be telling you about what's current in the US. So
Mm.
I remember getting an issue of that and seeing all the friggin' awesome, not just the episodes that were coming up that for us were years away, or at the very best, like a 15 quid video if we really wanted to, if we were desperate to watch it as soon as we could. But also like the cool like model kits, and we didn't get any of this sort of stuff. Cool little trinkets, and like there was one. They always had plates. There was always a selection of plates, like a really nice, like a plate with a really that you'd put on display, like your
Oh
grandmother
yeah.
would have on her cupboard of like the Queen. There'd be Star Trek ones of like a giant Picard face on a plate. There'd always be like 6 pages of that in Starlog. I was like, who buys this
Yeah,
crap?
and if you went to if you were like go on eBay, like they're still there on eBay. There's still
Yeah, you can
tons of
still get them.
those.
And there was like
Yeah.
a terrible model kit of Spock aiming a phaser at some kind of weird alien. And even though as a kid, I was like, why would he be doing that? What is this? It's not even from an episode. Even as a little kid, I'd pretty much seen all of the TOS. Like I would watch that show, you know, I recorded every episode off BBC Two, and with my dad's help because he wanted to watch them all again as well. And I watched the living crap out of them every night. I would watch 2 or 3 episodes of the original series for about 2 or 3 years, every night guaranteed. There's only 79 episodes, so I literally watched like probably seen every episode of TOS about at least 8 or 9 times, probably more than any other series,
Yeah.
possibly because it's easier because there's less episodes.
Tell you one thing that BBC did well though
Yeah.
was when they did Star Trek Night.
Oh god, yeah, I used to love those.
They did a few of them, and I've just managed to find one from 1996, which is the one that I remember most.
I remember two. Yeah, I remember 96. Did Jonathan Ross?
Jonathan Ross did the other one, which was 5 years later, because that was the 35th anniversary, and then for like the 30th anniversary, they did Star Trek Night was hosted by Craig Charles from Red Dwarf.
Yes.
And so he did like this whole intro to that, and then they did like a quiz show to boldly go where no quiz has come before.
It was the premiere of Voyager, wasn't it? Caretaker.
It was. Yeah. They so they had a bunch of stuff because it started at 7:15.
Yeah.
And there was a whole bunch of different stuff like documentaries and interviews, and there was a spoof Trek thing and stuff. And then at 10:50 in the evening, so 10 to 11, I remember staying up late for this just to watch the pilot episode of Star Trek Voyager, Caretaker.
Yeah. I think I watched it anyway. I had it on VHS. I remember making
that was my first time seeing it. Was
oh cool.
Was Star Trek Night, and then I remember that the one with Jonathan Ross. Wasn't it like Star Trek 4 that they showed as like the big end thing? Because I know that they showed Trials and Tribulations from Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, I think it was 4
earlier in the day.
Was weird.
Yeah, and then they had like a vote for like the best episode of for each of the captains and stuff, and then they kind of
Trials and Tribulations. That would have been 97. That didn't come out till 97. Maybe in the 2001 Star Trek Night they did that.
That's what I mean. So in that 2001 one with Jonathan Ross, they had Trials and Tribulations, and then they also had that's when they did Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home as a big movie.
And
that was there.
Did they show Endgame, the last episode of Voyager? Was that night? I do remember they did a preview of Star Trek Enterprise, and that was the first footage I'd seen of it. I knew there was, by that time, I was like absolutely berserk on Star Trek still at that point.
And Enterprise was when it was starting to get online. So there was trailers, like they did teasers from, because it was UPN originally that were doing that in the US. And so you'd have these teasers where it was just a star, like the warp star streak with it just sort of mentioning like before Kirk, Picard, Janeway, and Cisco,
there's a trailer,
that we had Enterprise, and that was pretty much the whole teaser.
Probably the only time that they announced an actor as the captain, where I was like, oh wow, that's wicked, I love that guy. So I already like Quantum Leap, so I knew exactly who Scott Bakula was. So as soon as they announced Scott Bakula, I was like, that's friggin' perfect. He would look. I straight away knew he'd be awesome, and obviously, he was. Some people obviously don't like Enterprises. That's again for another episode, but Yeah, I remember they did show some footage for the first time of Enterprise on that Star Trek 2001 night. I think it was just before it premiered in the US. And I
Hmm.
think I started watching that on Sky, but I think not long after that, I think I was actually kind of downloading like episodes via the interwebs because I think the internet had gotten decent enough, or at least I think when I was at school, when I was in
Hmm.
sixth form, I think at that point, I was sort of 16, 17 years old. I was using their internet to sort of obtain episodes through slightly non-official means, shall we say? Because they have really good internet there, and I burn them to a CD and take them home and watch them on my computer. So I didn't really need Sky at that point. That was the first time you could just, use a slightly dodgy way of obtaining an episode. But yeah, I remember those Star Trek nights. They're really, even if a lot of it you'd seen already, right? So
Hmm.
in some cases, but the
Yeah,
extra
and it's just
material.
like it's nice to be able to sort of see whatever we want now. We can just go and pick and choose. But there was certainly something about that lead up, and having an
Yeah,
entire night dedicated, to on something like BBC as well.
I mean, I don't think you'll get that these days, will you? I mean,
No.
well, there's no channel that. You mean sort of in the UK that all of Star Trek is on Netflix? So but it's not a broadcast, is it? You're just clicking on the thing and it plays. So apart from
Hmm.
documentaries that get made about Star Trek, like Trekkies and and all that stuff, and Trek Nation and things like that you won't get anything like that again. But that was really exciting in those days when we had those sort of things.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but yeah,
yeah. Well, let's switch from our short range to our long range sensors.
yes,
And start picking up Star Trek Voyager season two's episode Threshold, episode 15, I believe.
we've already picked up on. We've mentioned Voyager a few times, so I think it seems
Mm,
appropriate that we should dive straight in with
that's
a
it.
particular episode.
And
And
it's just easier to kind of get this one out of the way, I think.
I
Then because
think that's the
you know,
best way to put it.
yeah, if people haven't seen it, it's not the best. In fact, it's categorically the worst of Voyager. And then at least that's kind of done. Although we do have other ones because there's Spock's brain, which is I
Kind of
think
so bad
possibly
it's good
worse.
though in a way. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's especially
yeah.
terrible, but it's kind of enjoyable because it's so ridiculous. Do you know
Yeah,
season three
at
of
least it has
TOS
that kind
is
of
a
camp
mixed bag?
factor to it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so for people who aren't familiar, essentially it starts off with Tom Paris, Howie Kim, and B'Elanna Torres all kind of trying to figure out how to break the warp 10 barrier.
Yes.
Warp 10 being the theoretical maximum that Gene Roddenberry kind of established when Next Generation aired. So you can't go faster than
Yeah.
warp 10. But they
9 is as
found,
fast as anyone goes. Warp
yeah,
9 is always the fastest. Warp
that's it.
9.7 or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they've got they found some dilithium that is more stable at higher velocities, and they feel that they can reach this infinite velocity, which would have you occupy every point in space simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean,
Which
straight away, like one thing, just on,
Mhm.
on what you've said already, because it's kind of always jumps out straight away. This dilithium doesn't really get talked about much. They
It
sort of
doesn't get
they're in
talked about ever again.
no,
No.
exactly. That's an amazing thing you've just discovered. This new dilithium is the fundamental kind of fuel, quote unquote, of
Mm,
Star Trek. It's been established already for the whole 30-year run of the show by that point.
mm,
Um, and they've discovered a brand new form of dilithium that can make you go at warp 10. And they're just like, yeah, so we just saw this, we've got this new dilithium. It's like, okay, cool. Let's try and go to warp 10. And they just sort of briefly sort of talk about it in the mess hall when they're eating.
mm.
And Neelix then mentions that he's got some biscuits, which we don't see really, which is a bit disappointing. Actually, no, B'Elanna gets them, doesn't she? She goes and gets the biscuits, and
Yeah,
Neelix,
well, he's wanting to kind of help and stuff, and
yeah,
he's kind of smart in it because um he's asking, tell me the problem and I'll see if I can fix it because I've been an assistant engineer for 2 years on a ship, and Balana's like, do you have any food? And he's like, oh yeah, there's some biscuits in the cupboard in the back, and he's blatantly not getting up. She was obviously trying to get him to leave, and he's blatantly like, I'm
yeah.
not going anywhere. I'm staying here for this. And so she's like,
But you
fine,
know
I'll go
what?
get them myself.
Yeah, you know what? I love those little moments in the mess hall where
Yeah.
someone mentions like a really human, normal 21st century thing, like, "Oh, I want to have a sandwich." When someone says that, because used to talking about recalibrating the, sensors to filter out delta
Mm,
radiation is like, and that's the usual language that you hear, especially on Voyager, which really went mental with that stuff. But
yeah.
that was a nice little moment for me. Like, oh wow, they
Yeah.
biscuits. That's cool. That's a little snack thing that people have.
Yeah.
And he goes and gets
Him.
it.
Yeah, and he sparks the idea that fixes the problem, which essentially the shuttle keeps blowing up because they think that the nacelles are getting torn from the shuttle, but actually the warp nacelles are perfectly fine. They're going faster than the rest of the shuttle, and
Yeah.
it's the shuttle that gets torn from the nacelles. And so he says something that makes them realize that, and then they leave, and he's like, I have no idea what they just said, but you know,
I'm
I
getting really
helped.
nitpicky right now because that first the teaser, there was already something that kind of struck out at me when I watched it, because we both of us rewatched that in the last few days
Hmm.
in the lead up to to this recording this show. But something that I know that just annoyed me, and it's really annoying, Trekky, nitpicky kind of crap that normal people shouldn't care about. But they do that first simulation in the teaser, and the holodeck. Why does the holodeck always completely vanish when you fail something? It should just pause and say, "You have failed," and you're like, "Okay, cool, reset." Yeah, it has to get rid of the thing you're sat on. It has to get rid of the things you're surrounded by to really emphasize the fact that it's like if you lost at a video game, your console has to set on fire. It's like that. But anyway,
It should at least go back to the menu screen.
yeah, we'll just go back to the menu. We'll just pause the whole thing, right? But yeah, so
Yeah.
it ends up where the shuttlecraft blows up. It doesn't obviously, but it's just a holodeck version of it, and
Mm.
the program shuts down, and then it kind of pans over, and Tom Paris is kind of sitting on the floor. So I'm like, so either he was kind of always on the floor in the first place, or the seat disappeared and he fell on his ass.
I
That's
would
really
always say it was the
stupid
latter.
of the holodeck. Yeah, that's kind of dangerous, right? Like if you weren't prepared for that, and it very abruptly stopped. By the way, it wasn't like terminating program in 3, 2, so you could stand up and get out of the way of the stuff that will It just like it just like disappeared, and he just landed on his bum. You could break your bum bone, or
So
whatever you
much for
call it.
safety protocols.
Yeah, but
The thing
anyway, yeah.
I actually had more of a problem with Janeway,
You
who
think so? Why?
she just at the beginning, because she kind of goes to Tom and is kind of like, proper bigs him up and says, that there's people like Neil Armstrong and Cochrane, and there'll be Tom Paris, as these legendary names because he'll have been the first to break this barrier. So she's bigging him up with all of these great historical figures. The next day she comes in and says, you can't go because there's a 2% chance that you'll have an engrammatic imbalance that could give you brain damage.
That is kind of silly.
Yeah. So when he says, but this is my flight, and she's like, your flight? It's like, you've just been bigging out, you put the idea in his head that he's the one who's going to be doing all this and that he's going to be the big hero. And then you're just kind of like, your flight? That seems almost irresponsible.
She gets very grumpy and defensive at him, and he's kind of being nice, not putting his life at risk. But you probably would want the person that is like done the most tests and stuff on this. I mean, with a 2%, I mean, there's probably a 2% chance the shuttlecraft just blow up anyway. So
I'd say there's more chance of. I say there's more chance of him dying from ship failure than he is of having something from his engrammatic imbalance.
Yeah, there's probably the same chance of having a heart attack or something, or like the panel blowing up in front of him, which happens a lot in Star Trek. So you're probably okay just to roll with it. Yeah, she's a little bit funny, especially as she was bigging it up like you say, and then she kind of puts a complete dampener on it, and he's done other stuff that's like, has he had this engrammatic imbalance forever? Or has it just come up because of this warp 10 stuff he's been doing?
Just came up from that reason, and it's never been an issue since. Never been an issue before. It's just that was the thing.
And what did it even do? It didn't do anything for the story.
No, it didn't. It had no relevance.
For about a minute, and then he was on it anyway.
All it did was, it kind of set up like how he's going to be taking over, So it's like, oh, Harry Kim finally has something to do, and then like, fine, you can do it, and so Harry's benched again.
Yeah, back on
And you
his,
don't even get to see Harry sort of getting told, now you're going to do it. It's going to be your flight. Oh, it's not your flight. It's Tom's again. None
Did
of
she
that.
even get around to telling him? Because like
We
like
never
there was a
saw.
matter of yeah. So you could almost have cut that scene out. It would make no difference. It was just a weird extra thing put in just to create a little bit of extra tension for no reason. But the funniest one of there's two funny bits for me that are genuinely I don't know why these are in there. I don't know if they were trying to get a laugh because they're funny, and I think they are funny because you're supposed to laugh. But there's a weird bit where just after like Paris comes back from the Warp 10 flight, so we're jumping ahead a bit of where we are, but whatever.
Yeah, at this point, he does his flight. He's successful. He breaks the Warp 10 barrier, and then he's beamed back onto the ship
with seemingly no major like ill effects apart from the fact he just kind of passed out. I think.
Yeah.
He passed out. The shuttlecraft finds its way back, which I don't really understand either. It went into Warp 10, went off, occupied all areas of space simultaneously, and then they managed to find it. They searched for like 2 hours, I think is what Chakotay says.
Yeah, and he said that he saw Kazons and Klingons, so he's just name dropping species,
Yeah.
and can somehow remember and was able to process being in all these places simultaneously, and that she saw that Voyager was looking for him, so he pushed a button and came out of warp near to them.
Yeah, I don't know if it had like some kind of like homing thing in it, so it could just like instantly get back to where it should be, or if it went back into warp 10 to go back, or if it was flying around everywhere at once and it just like hit the stop button right on the right bit.
Yeah, it's just supposed to be him just dropping out of warp wherever he wanted to be, which is
and then go back again.
Yeah, it's awkward. No,
it's not explained. No. He just turns up and he's just unconscious, because of the crazy experience. But then he's on the sick bed, like he's lying on the sick bed unconscious, and not particularly, no one's scared that he's dead or anything. I think the doctor says, "Oh, he's kind of just, he's just out at the moment." And then Jamie's like, "Oh, can we wake him?" And the doctor says, "Well, let's see why not." And he just leans over to him and goes, "Wake up, Lieutenant!" and just like shouts in his ear and wakes him up. I was expecting him to get out like a hypo spray and like zap him with something, but he just yells at him to wake up. And you kind of laugh at it. And it's like, what is that?
I also like that later on he goes to the mess hall and Neelix makes him something called Paris Delight, which he finds is not very delightful at all. And then he, kind of ends up going into shock and passes out. And he's brought to sickbay. And, and so B'Elanna kind of mentions that he was drinking some coffee by Neelix. And the doctor's like, it's a miracle he survived.
Yeah.
I like those moments.
Yeah, they're nice moments, but it's kind of a joke that is already kind of tedious by this point that, everything Neelix cooks is crap and no one likes to eat it. But for one, if you look at the stuff he makes, I would eat that stuff. It looks kind of nice. And there's some obviously bad stuff, like when he tries to give Janeway that weird coffee that's like gel. Fair enough, that's like ridiculous. But well, for one, I'm like, come on, I don't see anybody else cooking with their bare hands, so give him a break. And maybe tell him, like, dude, put some like sugar on that or salt, and that'll sort that out. No worries. If you're just literally just accepting anything he chucks at you, you deserve to just deal with it. Basically, there is actually a book called Neelix's Cookbook you can buy.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, it's on Amazon. You just get it. So yeah, that's the ongoing joke that coming back, isn't it? About he's really bad at cooking and everyone hates the food, but everyone eats it. Whatever.
Yeah. And incidentally, it's not the coffee or anything that Neelix has made. It's that he becomes allergic to water, and then he can't process oxygen, and then the doctor realizes that he needs to fill the sickbay with 80% nitrogen, and it was like 20% acid dichloride. And that's not a real chemical name to my knowledge, but it's supposed to correspond to phosgene, which was a compound notorious for its use as a poison gas in World War I.
You actually looked that up? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that is basically what he had to breathe. This is the thing. He then dies.
Actually, before that is one of the best lines ever when Paris kind of knows he's about to die. Although we don't know if he's actually dying or if it's like, going to happen, and he becomes like delirious. And there's one bit where he's talking about what his gravestone might look like, and he goes, "Yeah, here lies Thomas Eugene Paris, beloved mutant." And then the doctor says, "Oh, you've become your radiation levels have gone up." And then Harris says, "Great, now it will read beloved radioactive mutant." And that's genuinely funny.
I know, and then he starts going really he starts talking about his past. He starts talking about how he lost his virginity at 17. So suddenly we've got that as a character trait for him, apparently. And then he starts talking about how much he loves pizza and how he's craving pizza. And then he asks Kez to come over and kiss him. And
which he says no.
Yeah, and then he has a thing, about how he wants them to talk about him to his father after he's dead. And then he dies. He just ends up sort of brain dead. And then there is actually a touching moment because Kez comes over and she does give him a kiss on the forehead. So he kind of got his kiss, which, you know, it's kind of, it's such a throwaway bit, but it's nice with Kez just sort of showing that sympathy, you know, the fact that there was some loss there. But there's still, there doesn't seem to be much distraught ness. For whatever the word is, you know, she doesn't seem to be completely breaking down in tears. It's just like he's gone, and then just a little peck, you know, on the forehead.
And it's interesting as well, like the way he describes his father, because that doesn't really reflect what we see of his father in later seasons. I mean, his dad becomes quite an important part of the show when we get to the 6th and the 7th seasons. Admiral Paris appears later on, and he seems like kind of a nice guy who's like trying to sort of, you know, he's actually actively trying to find Voyager. He's part of the project that actually ends up regaining contact with them, thanks to, you know, mainly thanks to Barclay. But he really describes him as like being a complete like dick to him as like a kid. Maybe he was, and he became nice or something in later years. But
family dynamics can be different though. So you know,
of course, he might be.
But the thing I don't get, and this is where it becomes really bad writing, which because you and I, we went to, just as an aside, we went to Destination Star Trek London back in 2012, and Brannon Braga, who wrote the teleplay for this, was doing a talk there, and he was talking about his work on Star Trek, and there were two girls that stood up, and they said, you know, we are huge fans of Threshold. We know that loads of people hate it, but we think it's one of the best episodes. It's our favorite. And he goes, "You're wrong. That's very nice of you to say, but you're wrong." And I do appreciate, I do appreciate that he is at least self-reflective and critical of his own work. Because to be a decent writer, you have to be. If you kind of think everything you put out there is great, you're never going to improve. And so he knows that there was a lot of mistakes that he made. Like he took out a lot of science stuff that would explain things better, what he was trying to do. He stripped out all the parts that actually would have potentially made the episode kind of work. But one of the big things which really doesn't make sense is we've already established he can't process oxygen. He needs to have basically poison gas to breathe. And then when he suddenly comes back to life, he can breathe oxygen. And he has two hearts.
Explain that. When he came back to life, I was like, God, you got to get that force field back up, dude, and get the gas in. And they were just like, no, he's all right. Well, they didn't say he was all right. He just carried on, you know.
Yeah. And so he's been able to occupy every single like space and time. Not an issue. He's got two hearts. He's basically just become a Time Lord.
So what happened? Yeah, there's that, and there's also like, and when I was watching this, my girlfriend was sat next to me, and I think she was kind of half watching it. She's seen all of Voyager, so she's seen it already. She wasn't too interested about seeing that episode yet. But,
that's fair.
Of all the episodes, but there's a bit when the Doctor says, "Yes, it appears you have two hearts," and I said to my girlfriend, "Oh, he's turned into Phil Collins," and she just looked at me because there's a song, you know, Two Hearts that Phil Collins. But anyway, no one laughed. She didn't laugh.
There's and he mutates further. His head goes bulbous and things start peeling off. And it becomes evident.
A very cool effect on the head. A very cool effect with it kind of pumping like a television.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of cool.
Yeah, the prosthetic work is, you know, as good as it always has been. It's very The Fly. I was getting a lot of sort of Jeff Goldblum kind of things, especially when his tongue suddenly just comes out of his mouth. Almost like they had to do it with a space shuttle, because if they did it with the transporter, then it would be far too obvious that it was like a rip-off of The Fly.
Yeah, and then there's a bit when, like, around that in that scene, I think, when Janeway turns up to try and sort of comfort him,
Mm.
and he's still behind the force field's back. I guess so. We won't escape. I don't think it's because of the air thing. And he starts basically berating Janeway, saying basically, kind of, you're an idiot. You don't understand. You're weak and pathetic, and you're like an ant to me now.
Mm.
Literally, the next episode, there's a very similar scene where Tuvok is behind a force field in sickbay, doing basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Saying, "Let me out! I'm going to kill you. You're all idiots. I hate you all now." Meld this the next a very, very good episode, by the way, straight after this one.
Mm.
So yeah, there's kind of a theme of man shouting behind sickbay force field in season 2 for some reason. But yeah, that was just an interesting observation I made when we got to that scene. But yes, Fly, totally, yeah.
Yeah, I think Kate Mulgrew, she does have a good reaction, because she's really good at very subtle facial expressions, and she does this kind of look, which is very subtle look of horror on her face, where
she lifts her eyebrow like, "Oh my god,
and
that's weird."
Yeah, and it kind of captures what you would expect from a captain, which is, this is actually really horrific, but I've still got to maintain composure because I'm still the captain. And so I thought that was good. But then he starts talking like Kevin from Harry Enfield and Chumps when he's got no tongue.
Yeah, that's a weird moment as well, when a bit of his tongue comes out, not like, because your tongue is quite long, it goes all the way down your throat, kind of thing, and so a little chunk of it comes off. And I love the way when he takes it off, he kind of does a little laugh, like,
yeah,
oops, like.
Yeah, he goes into complete nonsensical gibberish when he's talking about the present and the past as the future, and the future is in the past, and it almost felt like it was just written to sound smart.
Yeah, but Bragger was like, I can't be asked to like make some interesting phrasing here. I'm just going to throw this in there.
I'm going to fake intelligence and fake make this this sound smarter than it actually is, and it's lighting.
Well, Robert Duncan McNeil, though, fair play to the dude. He sold it. It was really well. With the crap he was given in that episode, I don't feel like his acting was really good. He didn't like make it any more cheesy or worse or more tragic looking. I mean, tragic as in like being so bad. And you felt for him. You did really feel for Paris. You weren't like, as much as we're talking about this episode being poor, you weren't just like, well, this is ridiculous, I hate it, look how stupid everything is. I didn't really feel like that at any point. Certainly not because of. It was more the situation as opposed to the acting or anything of Robert Duncan McNeil.
Yeah, they
awesome,
did.
Actor.
It's the perfect example of doing the best with what you're given.
Yes.
They all at least, they didn't kind of go, well, this is shit, we're just not going to put any effort into it. They still put their effort into it. They still earned their paycheck, but it was just not the best story for it. And then they have. I don't know how to feel about this, because they're trying to get anti-protons from the warp core to.
Yeah, they whipped that machine up really quick, like in half an hour.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like
a machine for that.
Yeah, she Torres says it's going to take 3 hours to build just the interface, and the doctor's like, he won't be alive in 3 hours. You've got 1 hour, and she's like, okay, and then it's done. And it's done.
Oh yeah, she's going to argue this for sure. She's like, yeah, cool, all right, and just walks off. And in the next scene, he's in like this amazing contraption that can do this completely brand new thing they've had to invent, and it works, I guess, in like half an hour.
But then he breaks away, and this is the thing that I'm not sure how I feel about it, because you don't see him actually doing any attacking. But I do also at the same time like that it is all from the Doctor and Kes's perspective, where they're looking at a monitor and it's all off scene, and you see, people running off to try and deal with it. You see phaser fire. You hear the stuff. You don't actually see it. But
there's kind of two things with that.
Well, the thing is, he's not changed. He's still like, it would make more sense if he has somehow mutated worse at that point.
Yeah.
And you don't see.
Has he developed like super strength? I guess he has. I think that's probably what they're trying to say. He can beat everyone up, and he can unlock himself from a huge machine that was holding him down.
Mm.
Again, yeah, that's not really been established or said. The doctors say his strength has increased 100% or something. He just kind of, yeah, does it. And then, yeah, it works when with just Kez and the doctor looking at the view screen and you're hearing the sounds. But I don't think that was an artistic decision. I think they just couldn't work out how to make that look like something. I would think that anybody could have just phasered him, and unless he's immune to phasers. I don't maybe he might be. I don't really know. I mean, I can't really say it would overpower a. Okay, we don't know how many. If there was a big security detail there, I mean, you would think if the Doctor knew he was much stronger than he normally would be, they would put every bugger with the phaser and like on, But yeah,
and then
he gets out.
Yeah, and then we have him kidnapping Janeway, knocking her unconscious in the turbo lift. And
how does he do that as well? He just kind of.
He just leaps at her, like the doors open, and he just leaps straight into the turbo lift, and then.
Yeah.
And then again, everything's off screen, and it's on the bridge with them saying that the shuttle bay door is opening, and obviously the shuttle's going off. And then this is the weird thing: it jumps to warp. They go to try and chase it but obviously they can't reach warp 10. And then as it reaches warp 10, they're like, we've lost them. We can't track them. Normally, when ships go to warp, it's not that long before they're hard to track anyway. And so
even
10,
on long range sensors.
Yeah, so at warp 10, why is it a surprise to them that they've lost him?
And that chase also, again, another nitpicky, like Super Trek nerd, stupid thing. When they're sort of getting up to, the shuttlecraft's getting to warp 9.5, and they're kind of already like struggling at warp 9.5. It was my understanding, and I'm pretty sure it's explicitly said in the pilot by Ensign, is it Studdy? The person that dies in the first episode again. So actually, it's not spoilers if you're watching a show about an episode about the season 2. That's the first episode of the show I'm referring to here. Yeah. So I don't care if you haven't seen it. You should have watched it.
Yeah, she's the one in the shuttle that takes that kind of gives Tom a tour as they're arriving.
Yeah, and Tom tries to crack onto her, or whatever it is. And she's like, I thought betazoids were warm and sensual. And she's like, I could be warm and sensual, but she's really like standoffish with him. Anyway, she says, oh yeah, it's got the Voyager has a maximum cruise velocity of warp 9.975. Now, a cruise velocity means you can just go at that speed constantly and nothing will happen. You won't fuck up you won't screw up, you won't screw up like the warp core, the hull integrity won't disintegrate and fall apart. It's literally a cruise velocity. You can just be at that for as long as you have enough dilithium that's working okay, or until it runs out. But they get to like warp 9.7 and 8, and they're already like, the hull is going to fracture and we're going to disintegrate. And it's like, no, you won't. You're not even at your maximum cruise velocity yet. A Voyager is really good. It can go really quick.
My understanding is that that's why the nacelles reposition themselves.
Yeah.
It's partly to maintain that speed. And there's an episode where warp travel damages subspace. So it's almost kind of like vehicles that, pollute the environment. And it's like, we need to kind of change to greener fuels.
Yeah, that was in Next Generation, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, it was in Next Gen. So they kind of had that. And so Voyager was supposed to get around that problem as well with the nacelles. But no, absolutely. Yeah. It's the speed thing that they dropped down to 9.5, stop the ship from shaking.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that at warp 9.9, if they did actually say, we're at warp 9.75, we're going any faster, we're really going to like screw stuff up and we'll disintegrate. Even if they did say that to keep in line with what we've already established as what Voyager's capable of, jumping from 9.975 to 10 is still like a ginormous leap. Like, it's warp 9.975 is like an infinity of the speed of like warp 10, because it's infinity. It's nowhere near, you can't keep up with it, no way. And even like going from warp 9.975 to warp 9.85 is a ginormous leap in speed that needs way more power. And and I don't know if Voyager can even, I don't actually know what Voyager's ultimate. I remember in the first episode of Next Generation, like the encounter at Farpoint, they established that the Enterprise can get to about 9.7. And it really starts to struggle. And like Data literally says, like, we can get to warp 9.7, but at extreme risk. for some reason, the first episodes of Star Trek series are really good at establishing the maximum warp speed of whatever ship it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So you could very easily have been a bit more cleverer with the speeds that they were talking about. God, we've gone way too long about this really ridiculous point. But yeah, that annoyed. Just to put it out there, that annoyed me because Voyager can cruise at a really high warp speed. That's way more than what they were supposedly breaking down at in that episode.
Worse than that was what happened when they start to, like, the Doctor figures out what's happening and that it's to do with it being natural, that it's natural evolution, and that the warp 10 threshold just accelerated the process. But that's not how evolution works. It's not like it's hard coded into your DNA and this is how we're going to appear. It's also to do with survival of the fittest and the environment. There's so many other factors. I mean, one of the things that they were looking at doing was they were trying to kind of give the concept of reverting to a more primordial state actually be
an advancement.
That's it. Yeah. Where we actually go back on ourselves, and stuff. But it wasn't explained well at all. And that's some of the parts where the writing really sucked. And then of course, them beam down.
Concept.
Yeah.
It is an interesting concept to go backwards, but it's total bollocks.
Yeah, yeah, because the way of going backwards is to turn them into giant salamanders.
Exactly, with little moustaches.
And Wok and Chakotay beam down, find Paris and Janeway, and they've had little salamander babies. So they've done their thing.
Yeah, horrifying thing to discover.
I do like the line where Chakotay is saying, "Not sure how I'm going to enter this into the log," and Tuvok's like, "I look forward to reading it."
Yeah, and then before that, like, there's another one of these weird, funny throwaway, like inadvertently funny lines when like Chakotay is like, "Oh, but which one is Paris? Which one is the captain?" And Tuvok says, "The female, obviously." And it's like, Chakotay doesn't say anything. He just kind of looks at him like, "Why would you even say that? That's obvious."
Yeah, because normally if you're talking like dogs and stuff, it's like, okay, well now I've got to look at genitals to figure out which is which. And right there, you've kind of got your pilot and your captain.
You really want to look at Janeway's junk, You
need to now look at their genitals. It's such a weird thing for Tuvok to mention.
It's a weird thought.
Especially at his age.
Yeah. And they're not massively horrified by what they've just stumbled across. What they do kind of look at each other when you see the babies come out, which obviously the realization of, oh my God, they've just like basically banged. This is an awkward situation. You don't really get a lot of time for that to sink in before we're kind of the reset button basically gets smashed.
It's smashed so quickly because, and I think part of the problem with this episode is they're trying to do a high concept thing within 45 minutes, and there is not the time. So as soon as they get them back to the ship, which you don't even see them really doing that, but they just appear on the ship and they're magically restored. They've fixed the DNA. And they're perfectly fine, and they also don't seem that traumatized. I mean, I kind of like what the Paris, where he's saying that he thought that by being famous for breaking the warp 10 barrier, it would make people respect him more, but it was more of an outside thing, and it wasn't fulfilling for him internally. There is something there, but it was just so rushed to get to that point.
Yeah, the way they talk to each other is kind of like they're quite jovial about it.
There's no kind of grossness, or there's no kind of like, this is awkward about what happened and kind of traumatizing. We may have to deal with this.
If I turned into a space salamander and shagged like someone that I worked with, and who also turned into a salamander, and we had salamander babies, and then I got turned back, I'd be like, really? You'd need like major counselling.
I know.
After that, that's like a weird like situation. I know Star Trek, your stuff, obviously you kind of, you kind of expect weird stuff to happen, but that is probably off the, there's no training for that,
But they just brush it off, and it's just kind of like, and next week we're back to normal, except for Tuvok, but we're back to normal,
Yeah, and like the funny thing, and there's another like funny line, which is where like, I think Paris is trying to sort of maybe like apologize for perhaps trying to like cracking onto her when they were both salamanders. And Janeway says, "Oh well, for all you know, the female in some species, the female starts the mating ritual." It's saying that it could have been me that sort of cracked onto you. So, and they just kind of very jolly about it. I mean, they're not laughing or anything, but there's just no impact. There's just no impact at all. No consequences. No. Yeah, it's just like smash the reset button, like when there's so many questions that should be left. But I don't know where to go. They don't know where they could have gone with it.
Yeah, there's not even that kind of pensive moment. Like there's certain episodes where, like at the end of Best of Both Worlds, when you've got Picard, and he just, he seems like everything's back to normal, he's fine, and then he just sits, and you can sense that there's just that weight and that trauma that he's dealing with, that he's not showing the crew.
Yeah, it's great. It's literally
there's none of that.
Yeah, he literally he sits down, I think, or he might even be standing up, and he looks out the window of the ready room, and he's just about to take a sip of his drink, and he sort of stops halfway, as if we just realised that what has happened to him, like he's basically killed him, like thousands of people, and he just puts the cup down and just stares blankly. And that's the end of the episode. There's kind of the music goes a bit creepy for a second, and it's done really well. There's nothing like that. It just kind of goes into a jolly end of episode jingle, and then like done.
Yeah.
Bizarre all round.
We've been going for an hour and a half now, so I think that probably just about wraps it up for our first episode of Long Range Sensors.
I think it does. Threshold, God, we did it though. It's out of the way.
It's done. It's done with. We can move on. It only gets better from here.
We can hit the reset button.
We hit the reset button.
Yes. We're doing it right now.
Oh, well, thank you everyone for hanging out with us, and please let us know how we did. We'd love to know your thoughts, and we look forward to being able to make many more of these shows in the future. We have a few ways that you can get in touch. You can reach us via Twitter at Star Trek LRS. You can go via our website, longrangesensors.com, or you can even email us directly at longrangesensors@icloud.com. We've also been setting up a Patreon page, which hopefully should be ready by the time this episode is out. Basically, we have some great plans lined up for things that we want to be able to do as the show grows. So if you see value in our show and you would like to help support us, you can do so over at patreon.com/longrangesensors. And of course, if you want to help, but you aren't able to contribute financially, that's absolutely fine too. If you enjoy listening to the show, then please tell a friend, share it on social media, transmit it to a loved one via Subspace. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to share our content and goes a long way to help our show reach even more people. My name is Alastair, and you can find everything I'm up to at alastairmcfly.com. You can follow me at imcfly on Twitter. And if Twitch streams are your thing, you can also check out my channel where I stream Minecraft, Among Us, and alternate between some classic Star Trek and Star Wars games over at twitch.tv/alastairmcfly. Trev, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I've been Trev, and you can follow me at Henry Jones Jr. on Twitter. I have another podcast. We mentioned it at the beginning, but if you want to find it, it's actually called Console Shock. It's about retro modern video games, and that's on YouTube. You can just search Console Shock on YouTube. We've got a website, consoleshock.net. It's also on all the podcast clients, so Stitcher and iTunes. And yeah, that's all of my stuff.
You've been listening to Long Range Sensors, where Warp 9.975 is fast enough.